Caitlin Clark beat the NBA. Sort of. We have to be fair with the actual context of this conversation. But it was revealed earlier by Awful announcing that the NBA's ratings were down for the opening games on ESPN. More or less, here's what it looked like when you take that into account. You had the numbers for those games being 1.6 million viewers on ESPN for their debut, down from the previous year, 42% from Victor Wembanyama's debut. I pointed out that Caitlin Clark's debut had 2.1 million viewers on ESPN2. Now, to be fair, that was not the first NBA game of the season. The NBA season tipped off before with the TNT broadcast, which were actually up. The games since then have been down. But the Clark debut was the first game of the WNBA season on ESPN networks. So when you compare the first NBA broadcast this season to the first WNBA broadcast last season, the WNBA actually outdid the NBA on the ESPN networks. Now, I did a deep dive on the ratings, and you can check that out below, the link to Women's Fastbreak on SI in the description. And it's pretty intriguing when you look at it, because the numbers show when Clark is involved, obviously, this is more and more of a competition. And even when she's not, the WNBA numbers have gone up. But I've said before, I never in a million years thought it would be a comparison, that you'd even be able to have the conversation, regardless of one individual star or not, that the WNBA could be in the same sentence as the NBA without it being a laughable proposition. But Fever games on NBA TV actually often did better than the NBA games on NBA TV. And last year, if you look at the numbers, last year on the NBA season, 1.6 million viewers across TNT, ABC, and ESPN during the 2023-24 season. That does not include games that aired on NBA TV, where the number was at 330,000. Meanwhile, the WNBA regular season averaged 1.19 million viewers across ESPN. So, platform to platform, it was like 1.6 to 1.1, 1.2 almost. Not that far off, really. The overall number for the WNBA was 657,000 when you bring in NBA TV. And of course, Clark's games did 199% better than other matchups across the course of the season. The first week of the playoffs for the NBA was 3.17 million viewers, while the first two games of the Fever series against the Sun was at 2.15 million. So not that huge gap. And that's with that series only lasting two games and game one being head-to-head against the NFL. The WNBA draft, 2.45 million viewers. The NBA draft, 4.41. So still a significant edge for the NBA, but not staggering. The All-Star game for the WNBA, 3.44 million to the NBA's 5.5 million. Again, same deal. A significant edge to the NBA, but not staggering. Where the staggering difference came was in the NBA Finals, which averaged 11.3 million viewers. Meanwhile, Game 5 was just over 2 million for the WNBA, which was a huge jump from before. The most viewed WNBA Finals game in 25 years. So you can't sniff at that or sneeze at that or any of those expressions. I mean, it's still a huge jump for the WNBA, but 11 million to 2, that's a massive, huge difference. Of course, Caitlin Clark's team was eliminated after 2 games, which makes a big difference. If the Fever had continued to advance, the ratings would only continue to go up. The last game that Clark and the Fever played was 2.5 million viewers. Game 2 against the Connecticut Sun, that was in the first round before things could even ramp up or ratchet up. If the Fever had gone to the semifinals, the numbers would have gone up 3-4 million, I would bet. And if the Fever had made to the WNBA finals, I think you're looking at least 5 million viewers, just conservatively guessing. It's impossible to know for sure. Regardless, in certain situations, You can say that the WNBA outdid the NBA, very specific situations. In a more broad sense, when it was relative network to network and it wasn't, one unfairly on one network versus the other, when it comes to accessibility, it was relatively close. It wasn't a blowout. The NBA beat the WNBA. Obviously, like I said before, Caitlin Clark games on NBA TV more often outdid the NBA than not. And the WNBA as a whole, of course, grew. The playoffs for the WNBA were up 142%. That's without including the finals. And of course, that's with the Fever being eliminated after just 2 games. Now that this year, again, as you saw, the NBA has trended down some. I don't know if that will continue or not. And the WNBA, you would have to expect, will continue to trend up because this was just the beginning. You would assume Clark and the Fever will advance farther next year, which will help the WNBA ratings. You'll have Paige Beckers and a new draft class come in. You'll have fans who got familiarized this year return and perhaps grow off that for the rest of the league. I was at the Liberty game, 18,000. I was at the Lynx game, 18,000. So you could see that gap continue to shrink. And I think there are some things about the WNBA game that have been appealing to people in comparison to the NBA game, where it's become so 3-point reliant. And sometimes the way it's officiated can be tough to watch. Guys baiting for fouls. And I say this as a lifelong NBA fan. Meanwhile, there's like super heroic stuff that goes on in the NBA all the time. The WNBA may remind fans a little bit more of a throwback era, in a sense, in the way basketball is played. And then, of course, you cannot ignore the singular star power that is Caitlin Clark, who has changed the entire dynamic herself. People like to say Magic and Bird with her and Angel Reese. There's a Jay-Z line from the Blueprint. Michael, Magic, and Bird all rolled in one. And that's kind of what Caitlin Clark has been for the WNBA. Now, that doesn't mean Angel Reese hasn't brought some fans in. She certainly has. Asia Wilson has gotten more fans or more eyeballs on her, at least. Paige, Juju. I've referenced all these conversations a million times. The rising tide lifting all boats. And I think, the WNBA, it was proven. The WNBA finals numbers were way up. The WNBA playoff numbers were way up with or without Clark. Now, the numbers were up explosively with Clark. But I did think it was kind of interesting to see the first games on ESPN of the NBA did not do as well as the first games on ESPN of the WNBA. Now, of course, there was the Caitlin Clark curiosity involved in that, but I believe there was an NBA playoff game at the same time as well. So just some food for thought, because I never would have thought this would even be something I could utter out loud.